Well, hello ladies and gentlemen, and it's Ken, aka That One Noob, here today with yet another exciting audio review. Today we'll be taking a look at the Feliks Elise, which is a single-ended OTL tube amplifier offering from Feliks Audio. Now, for those of you who have watched this channel or have kept up with the reviews on Headfi / my own personal blog, you'll notice that this isn't our first run-in with Feliks Audio. In fact, just last year, we had the Feliks Audio Espressivo on for a full review, and at its then $349 USD price point, it was indeed very impressive. And here's why. The Feliks Audio Espressivo offered a lot of good quality traits in a single, fairly cheap package. It had great build quality, it had a really engaging and dynamic sound signature, and that was just a lot of things done right in a fairly small package. Now, granted, there were some issues with the Feliks Audio Espressivo, mainly due to its occasionally hot treble that was made even more accentuated by certain choices of tubes, its smallish soundstage, and generally mediocre detail retrieval. All that said, it was still very good, and even at its new $449 USD price point, I do think it's a worthy buy. However, there was room for improvement, and clearly the stage was set for a more powerful amplifier, and this is where the Feliks Audio Elise comes in. In late 2014, the Feliks Audio Elise was released to much fanfare with a better stock setup of 6AS7G/6SN7 tubes and an upgraded, somewhat oversized transformer. Now, I think it's amassed a very large community following since then, and most of it can be found at the Headfi thread, which I will link in the description below. Now, the thread contains exhaustive notes on tube rolling and modifications, as well as links to past threads and even more collections of information. And if that's something that really interests you, I do recommend that you check it out immediately. Now, the Elise also has the rather unique distinction of being hailed as one of the best pairing amplifiers with the Beyerdynamic T1, and the latter point is really of great interest to me because the Beyerdynamic T1 is one of my favorite headphones. It's not very expensive. When it's amped right, it really keeps up with even the most modern of flagships, and it doesn't sound bad. It sounds really good, and it's really quite balanced. So, having said that, having got that fanboy plug out of the way, I will explain a bit more about how these two pair and why it's kind of special. Now, apart from that, before I go further into this review, I would like to thank the good folks at Feliks Audio, in fact, Lucas in particular, for offering me this opportunity to help cover their updated 2017 Feliks Audio Elise. Why do I mention 2017? Because in the 2017 model, you'll find a somewhat improved circuit with a lower noise floor, as well as an extended 3-year warranty, both of which are very welcome changes to an already excellent product, if you ask me. Now, with that out of the way, let's get started proper. As far as packaging and accessories go, I have to say that the Feliks Audio Elise is rather lean on that. You get a cardboard box packed in with styrofoam, and it's just pretty utilitarian. You take the amplifier out, you have an included power cord, and you can just get it up and running in a matter of minutes. If you're interested in watching that video, I do have a link to that in the description below, and it's going to be the full unboxing of the Feliks Audio Elise, if that is something that interests you. Moving forward, I do want to talk about build and design. I think most seasoned audiophiles will know, with some situations, aesthetics just goes out the back window when it comes to sonic considerations. But fortunately for us, the Feliks Audio Elise makes no such compromise. This is arguably one of the best looking pieces of audio equipment on the market right now. It's got this minimalist chic, and it's definitely because of the black aluminum enclosure that's about 1mm thick all around, except at the front faceplate, which is a full centimeter thick. I like that the faceplate has solid heft without being excessive or ridiculously sized, you know. Apart from that, it's a very simple design. You have one single-ended output at the front, and one set of RCA inputs and one set of RCA line outs. So not much by way of input options. In fact, it is a little bit less than the Espressivo, which had 3 sets of RCA inputs I'm hoping to see that come back perhaps in a future model or perhaps a future iteration of the Elise, but it's not a huge complaint for me. I don't tend to switch between DACs, okay? Apart from that, the Feliks Audio's perceival isn't actually as small as the photos might suggest. It comes in at about 31 cm by 20.5 cm and it's about 17 cm tall, so it's not huge, but it is certainly sizable. Apart from that, the finishing is excellent. I really like the new chrome plaque that they've installed at the top of the oversized transformer. It just matches the chrome upgrade tubes really nicely. And for those of you who are into tube rolling, I'd say as an aesthetics aside, if you can get one with the reflective chrome finishing, go ahead and do that because it looks great with this amplifier. Now, all that aside, operation is indicated by a single a single solid blue LED that comes on when you turn the unit on. And apart from that, the unit runs actually not that hot. I think it's partially due to the metal enclosure. It's not all that hot, and overall quite acceptable. I found it to be okay to put my hand within close proximity of this unit. It's not an issue at all. There are no glaring issues as far as build quality goes. There is one small quibble on my unit, and that's that the volume pot is slightly scuffed, but I do suspect that this is probably because mine is a B-stock unit, and rotating it does seem to cause it to rub against the faceplate of the amplifier at times. It's not a terrible scratching, you're not going to permanently damage the faceplate, but it did seem to me that there was just a little bit more friction than usual. Apart from that, I am very impressed by the way the Feliks Audio Elise looks, as I'm sure that those of you who've read the written review can tell. It looks great in the photos, and I can assure you it looks even better in real life. As far as tech specifications go, the Feliks Audio Elise isn't the most complex piece of equipment available, but one of the big questions is what the output impedance of the headphone amplifier was. And I more or less measured it immediately after I got the amplifier, and I found it to be somewhere in the 54 ohm region, give or take a little bit. And this isn't surprising because the community had previously mentioned that the output impedance was 40 ohms or 50 ohms depending on who you asked. So mine is a little bit higher, but it's not entirely surprising. And part of the reason why I'm not surprised is because this is an OTL tube amplifier, and as the name suggests, it lacks an output transformer. Now, this design philosophy was that dropping the output transformer would help to reduce distortion, but the downside of that is that the output impedance is also going to be higher, and in this case it's 54 ohms high. So one of the key things is that if you're going to use a dynamic pair of headphones with this headphone amplifier, it is important to do a bit of impedance matching, and one of the simple rules that I go by is that the output impedance of the headphone amplifier should be 1/8 that of the headphone impedance, and doing so will ensure that you won't get any weird changes to the FR/transient response of the headphone, and that everything will work nicely. Now, out of curiosity, I did run various low impedance headphones/IEMs to varying degrees of success. I cannot recommend using low impedance sensitive IEMs on the Feliks Audio Elise. I don't think this is what the amplifier was designed for, and I've seen reviews where people have plugged the K10 into this, and I don't think that's a fair evaluation of what the Feliks Audio can do, because single-ended OTL tube amplifiers don't pair nicely with low impedance, high sensitivity IEMs. What I got out of my IEM testing experience was that with the more sensitive ones, you can definitely hear a bit of transformer hum in the background, and some of the pairings were oddly tizzy and harsh, and the sub bass was kind of rolled off, and as a whole the sound didn't sound very cohesive. But you switch to something like the R70X or the Beyerdynamic T1 and you have absolutely no problems anymore. For a bit more information, especially some of the RMAA stuff, please do check out the room review. It'll go over this in a slightly more verbose manner. And now, finally, we get to the sound, and I think this is the part a lot of us have been waiting for. Well, I plugged the Beyerdynamic T1 into the Elise with great expectations and a certain degree of impatience, and I do recall the fact that the tubes were still tingling a bit when I gave the Elise its first go. I was not doing this because it was a recommended practice, and I really wouldn't recommend this to anyone else, but I did it nonetheless. Not because I'm a professional, but because I'm a bit of an idiot. So don't do what I do. All that aside, I have to say that I was quite immediately impressed, and that I do think the hype had delivered. Unlike certain things in recent memory, no shade is going to be thrown right now. Tempering my initial excitement though, I sat myself in a chair and then listened, and hundreds of hours later, I do think that my initial impressions were pretty spot on. This is an incredibly pleasant sounding headphone amplifier, and I do like the house sound a lot. It carries a touch of warmth, especially through the mid-range, but it still has well-extended highs and a solid lower frequency performance. It isn't a sloppy tube amplifier. In fact, it does rival my liquid carbon in terms of speed. Of course, this changes a little bit once you use the LC on the balanced output, but that's a story for another time. Staging is excellent, and this is an amplifier that I believe would pair very nicely with a lot of different pieces of kit. Headphone recommendations wise, I would say that the Beyerdynamic T1 is definitely a go-to headphone pairing with this amplifier, and I do imagine that the HD800 would work very nicely as well. The Elise does bring out the best qualities in both the T1 and the HD800 and will not weaken the sound, unlike the Espressivo. Now, the other thing was the Audio-Technica R70X, which also worked very respectably with the Elise. I do have to say that the bass was a bit softer than I would have preferred, but overall it still worked very nicely, and it is a general indication that this is a very balanced sounding headphone amplifier. One of the other notes that I wrote down that I thought was personally quite interesting was that this paired nicely with an R2R DAC, and specifically my Bifrost multi-bit. I did feel that the multi-bit's somewhat exaggerated presentation came together in a very continuous and a bit more rounded manner once I plugged in the Elise. And for me, this is a positive thing. I don't always find the exaggerated sound to be necessary, and I do feel that the blending of the extreme sides with the center image is a positive improvement. Now, the Feliks Audio Elise has a reliable and predictable bass section. It definitely has more mid-bass / upper bass emphasis than in the sub-bass, and tends to be just a little bit softer. However, this does add quite a bit more heft to the lower frequencies with certain headphones like the Beyerdynamic T1, and is a welcome addition to the otherwise tight and resolving sound of the Beyers. One thing though is that the sub-bass extension isn't particularly breathtaking. I tried Debussy's Underwater Cathedral with the Elise, and I felt that the extension, while decent, it didn't go all the way down, and there was certainly more information that could have presented with greater presence. But that's a small complaint. The Elise is still a very well balanced headphone, and the bass is no exception. This isn't a woolly or uncontrolled bass tube amplifier, and you'll find that the Elise overall still delivers very solidly in the lower frequencies. Now, the mid-range of the Elise is where it really starts to shine. I think the term that has been used before is euphonic, and I do have to agree. It's a very liquid sound with slight warmth and generally good body, and the end result is an overwhelmingly pleasant and addictive sound. The lower mid-range could use just a little bit more texture at times, but it's not a complaint of mine. And when it comes to female vocals and the upper mid-range, wow. Yeah, the Elise just delivers solidly. There is close to nothing that I would change at this point with the Elise's upper mid-range. It's just that good. Now, one of the tracks that I tried that really helped to contrast this was Antonio Carlos Jobim's Waters of March. The way his voice bounces off against the glossy, unified sound of the vocal support really demonstrates the Elise's ability to render different timbres and textures accurately. Now, the highs on the Elise have been improved significantly. There is still a touch of sparkle, but it is not hot like the Espressivo. And this point is very important when considering certain choices of headphones. I did listen to a wide variety of tracks when evaluating the highs, and One of my favorite ones, though it's not so-called audiophile grade, was Paradise City by Guns N' Roses. You'll notice that the guitars, and especially in the opening sequence, have a really nice electrical sheen to them, and Axl Rose's really distinctive falsetto/full voice combination came through, just powered right through the track, and I have to say it was an exciting headbanging experience. Now, the flexibility afforded by the Elise is very much welcome, and I do think that it will work for many genres. I'm not saying that amplifiers should be designed specifically for one genre, but there are some sound signatures that are indeed limiting. Fortunately, we're dealing with a very versatile amplifier here, and the Elise delivers in most parts. Now, I do want to talk about one album specifically, and that is Antonio Carlos Jobim's really awesome Stone Flower album. This is one of the best ACJ albums in my opinion, and an excellent demonstration of Jobim's breadth as an artist. In a carefully reinvented fashion, Jobim brought bossa nova into the modern era with a polished production featuring trombones, acoustic guitars, and that oh-so-good ever-present bass. It is a combination that would have fit really nicely into the chic 70s cocktail party scene, and you know what? I can just imagine an endless flow of cigarette smoke when I listen to the album. All that aside, it's a really solid album, and I do have the Blue Spec CD release from the CTI Supreme collection that I got while in Japan. I'm very happy, as this is probably the best version that I've come across so far. Now, the album is a great way to enjoy the Elise in my opinion. The opening track, Teresa My Love, is rendered excellently, with the amplifier's staging coming into play as an interestingly mixed sound, you know. The Brazil is a simple joy, and the T1 Elise combination just goes through this entire album with such fluidity and resolution. And the rest of the pieces will just end up falling into place. Do listen to it if you get the chance. In conclusion, I do have to say that the Feliks Audio Elise is indeed a great amplifier. At its current price point for both the base and upgraded versions, it is really hard to find something that does so much right. The build quality on the Elise is simply excellent, and the well-finished and machined chassis makes for a great talking piece. The current tube setup opens up some serious rolling options, and the near-endless modding opportunities that you will have to proceed at your own risk with is perhaps one of the greater draws for those who like to continuously play around with their audio gear. Now, the greatest draw for me personally was the fact that the Feliks house sound was so well executed. It's pleasant, well balanced with a touch of warmth, and it's a clear step up over the Espressivo, providing obvious improvements in key areas such as the treble, soundstage, and general resolution. I will conclude that it is criminal for you to have a Beyerdynamic T1 and not attempt to give this amplifier a try. Everyone with a Beyerdynamic T1, go out there, try this amplifier. And with that, folks, I really hope that you've enjoyed. This is That One Noob, signing out.